Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Tapiwa Matsinde. Tapiwa is a British Zimbabwean design consultant, writer, and curator, renowned for her work in promoting contemporary African design. She authored the book Contemporary Design Africa, showcasing the work of African designers and artisans, and emphasizing the continent's rich design heritage and modern interpretations. Tapiwa's work often explores themes of identity, heritage, and the global perception of African design. So, Tapiwa, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm really excited about our conversation because for the longest time I have admired your work. I have your book. I got the book before I met you, and then I met you, and you see it because it's got quite a distinctive cover. So every time you see, an interior sort of African inspired interior, you see the book there. So I'm really excited to talk to you because I think our audience will benefit from your many years within the I would say cutting edge, I suppose the premium end of African design. And I think that you'll have some amazing stories and inspiration to share with everybody. But to start off with, could you just share your journey and tell us how you started on this design quest that you're on?
Sure. Firstly, thank you for having me, Daphne. It's a real honor. Um, I come from a graphic design background, actually. So I trained as a graphic designer in Harare and then moved to the UK and was studying what was then called new media. This was like websites and all these things were coming out. So I spent a good, more than a decade doing that. And then along the way, I then fell into designing jewelry. So I had a small business where I was doing handmade jewelry, using precious metals and semi-precious stones. And yeah, that did okay for a while. And then the recession hit, and I just found myself in this kind of limbo, being in the middle market. If you sold at the lower end, people were doing well. If you sold at the high end, you were doing well. But if you were in the middle, you were really getting squeezed.
Mhm.
And so then I made that decision to go back and study, to have a master's. So I earned a master's in design management, focusing on creative enterprise. And the whole idea was to create, to help me gain the skills to be able to build a good business. But during my time on the course, I then started to notice that there was a lot of things happening in the world of, Africa, creativity, design. Fashion was making a lot of waves at the time. And, art was also sort of like gaining a lot of interest and attention. And it sort of like reminded me that I was feeling this, that I had been feeling this disconnect.
Mm.
And it was just this suddenly pull back towards the continent, and this pull back to, just thinking of my time growing up in Zimbabwe and how I would be surrounded by, craftsmanship. You would just see it. You could walk down a street, there'd be vendors selling, there'd be the covered markets, and just that accessibility to it, which you don't always get in a place like the UK. It usually is behind closed doors. And so I became fascinated in what was happening and what, just thought, should I be a part of it? Where do I fit into it? And following my jewelry sort of interest, I kind of set up a blog. And this is a time again when blogs were sort of like very new.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to have a space to store all my findings, my research.
Mm.
The idea of like doing a scrapbook, I just felt that was too time consuming. So a blog sort of like made sense. But as I was setting it up, I suddenly realized that I was like seeing all these other things,
Mm.
other people doing stuff, all these design brands and all these interesting, furniture designs, textile designs. And I thought, hang on a second, why is no one talking about this?
Mm.
Why is no one sharing that? So instead of a jewelry blog, it just turned into this design blog, which was called African Daydreams when it started, and it was just like this vision of an Africa that I wasn't seeing
Right.
represented in the media.
Uh,
It was a very diverse Africa. It was.
so, sorry, it may have been around the same time I went through that thing that you
Mhm.
described as the pull, because I left Malawi, where I'm from, in my early 20s and just took these things for granted.
Yeah.
And my pull took me in the direction of fashion because I had actually been taught by my mother how to sew. So before I
Mm.
went to university, I was already sewing for people and that kind of thing. But for a long time, I just, I guess, assimilated into UK culture until something just yanked me out of that reverie and made me realize that I'm not actually expressing myself through what I
Yeah.
wear, and
Yeah.
took me in the direction of fashion. But
Yeah.
yes,
I think it was just that awakening at that time. It just seemed like everything, it just seemed like the continent was on fire with creativity, and that was just spreading, across the globe and into the diaspora, and people were really um, coming together through that and
yeah,
latching onto it and wanting to express yourself and express your culture.
yeah, exactly. So what did African Dreams turn into? What's the name of the blog now?
Oh, the name of the blog now is Atelier 55. It's gone through
Yeah.
many iterations. I think I would say that the blog is probably a reflection of my own journey and how I've made my way through this industry.
Okay.
Because it was when I started, I would say there wasn't really a job, so to speak,
Mm.
in it. I was making up my own job,
Mm.
in order to be able to find a way of being able to promote designers and artisans and the work that I was seeing. At the time, a lot of people weren't interested, and I would say that as the Western media, were just, you were just sort of like pushed to the side. No one bothered with you. And I remember at the time there were a lot of lifestyle blogs, that appealed to wider audiences that were doing really well, very successful, and you would see them getting ads and things like that.
Mm.
Um, and then I would see that the blog that I'm doing is like, yeah, it was drawing attention, I would say, from those of African heritage.
Right.
And that was where my biggest audience, and that's where I saw that there was kind of like this need um, to connect to design that reflected who people were,
Okay.
that spoke to their identity, that spoke to their heritage, that spoke to their culture.
Mm.
um, and the challenge then was like, how do you make these products accessible? Because I think that was the main thing at the time. It was like you could see what was being made and what was being done, but trying to get them into the hands of people
Mm.
um, was the big challenge, and I would say still
It
remains a
is.
big challenge at the moment. Yeah. So from the blog, I then decided to publish the book.
Yeah.
Approached a publisher about it because I think my biggest fear was like, I'm doing all this work, I'm putting all this content on. What if my blog, gets hacked or something? Then I'm going to lose all this. And I
Yeah.
just felt, again, there were books on fashion, there was books on African art, architecture,
Mm.
not one on design. So I just pitched it, and yeah, got a publishing deal on the back of that, and that was an opportunity also to, I think, really dive
Mm.
into the industry, into what was happening across the continent, and also to get to meet the names behind the works, and to see what inspires them, to see sort of like the themes that are emerging in terms of like sustainability and aesthetics and what motivated them. So for me, it was a learning process for me, as much as anything. And I think it's proved to be a reference book. Which I would say also is that it is reflective of its time, and it will be 10 years on the 25th of May.
Okay.
25, that would be 10 years of the book being out. But I would say, yeah, it's definitely reflective of its time, because in that period, I can see sort of like how much
Mm.
the industry has changed, how much it's evolved, how um, other countries have come, have emerged and have
Yeah.
become sort of powerhouses in design, whereas at the time we were looking at mainly places like South Africa, Morocco.
Right.
who was like the typical countries where their design was like more visible.
Is
And
there a
now,
is there a second volume coming?
oh, I get asked that. I haven't worked on one yet. It's finding the time to do that. I think it would be good to do one because I think there's a lot more. There are a lot more exciting names who have come out now. So yeah, perhaps one day.
Yeah, I think that would be an amazing project. I mean, I think you would agree that in the past 10 years, there's just been so many big moments in
Yeah,
African popular culture, from music to film, art. But but I think that there isn't that much commentary. Whilst people are taking on African design, sort of like interior design, it would be lovely to market with the book, because everybody's coffee table has a decor book. I mean, it's just amazing for it. But as well as exploring the questions that you tend to explore now on your blog, because it's not just about um, talking about designers. I think you do a lot of exploration of the bigger issues around design. It's about identity and culture, which makes it really exciting, and why I think it would be great to see how you contextualize that in the form of a book, or in your work, actually. So
yeah.
so apart from seeing um, designers come up in other areas of the continent, what other changes have you seen over your last 10 years of observing this space?
In terms of changes, I would think it's the confidence, that designers have had to put their work out there. I think it's also the refinement and the sophistication,
Mm,
pitching the work at a level um, that isn't just how African design was seen before, in terms of this rough and ready sort of touristy aesthetic.
mm,
Um, so, and that means that, design from Africa can hold its own alongside some of the best in the
mm,
world. And that has made, critics, curators, retailers, commentators, sit up and take notice.
mm,
Um, because I think when I started, African design was sort of seen as a trend. It was kind of like pitched as a trend.
mm,
And I remember having to keep saying to people, but no, this isn't a trend. This is a continent, right? This is a
mm.
people and
No.
a creativity. Um, and this is people expressing themselves. That can't be a trend because we're not disappearing. We're here to stay. This is how we're starting. So I think it's just there's been that respect. I think that's growing. There's still a way to go,
Mm,
but I would say there is, the doors have opened a bit more than they were when I started. Because when I started, it was a case of having to bang and smash doors down in order just to be seen. But now I think African design is kind of like being accepted, but I would still say it's still a few designers.
mm,
So there'll be the recognized ones, and it'll be the same names who get called up. And
mm.
it's now a case of just trying to get, more of the unknowns and maybe the emerging designers, also giving them access to, to the platforms, that can help them grow and reach wider audiences as well.
Yeah. Do you see? I mean, obviously, we're talking about. I don't know whether you can talk about the acceptance of African design on the continent, because I do know that when I was, I remember having somebody from West Africa visit my house,
Mhm.
and he's looking around and he asks me, like, "Why do you have so much African decor in your house?" And I remember, like, it's like being asked, why do you have two eyes? Like, for me, it was so natural. But I wonder whether in your travels and in your interactions, I know you've curated at events like Design Indaba, which is, I think, one of the foremost design events globally, if I'm not mistaken. Do
Yeah.
you see an uptake of African design on the continent?
Yeah. First, I would say it wasn't designed in Java. It was handmade contemporary, and that was held in Johannesburg.
Okay.
And that was yeah, kind of like a very sort of like I think defining moment for myself in being able to realize this idea of bringing different designers from across the continent and their products together,
Mm-hmm.
because what it did is it fostered relationships, for people to see what each other, what each is doing
Mm-hmm.
in their corners of the world, and then help them connect and help them have those conversations long after the event
Yeah.
happened. But I think in terms of, sort of like getting Africans on the continent more interested in design, it's a case of having to value what's being made locally. I think, going back to what I was saying before about, growing up in Zimbabwe and being surrounded by craft, you sort of take that for granted, and perhaps don't appreciate as much the value of what is being made, because simply I can go down to my local market and get it, and it's a cheap price, and then I hear people, from the continent who will see the expensive prices that, designers going for in a place like the UK or Paris, and they think, I wouldn't pay that much,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's about understanding the value of what we have.
Right.
And then, and then when you understand that, being willing to, or being open to, I think, celebrating our own.
Mhm.
And I think that's really important, rather than coming in and just basically saying, "Oh, I can get my father to do that or my brother to do that," because those are some of the things that we hear as well. It's like someone would be like, "Oh, that's really nice, but I can get that done on the market for this price." And so so I think it's about valuing the skills. In Africa, across the continent, has just like this rich heritage of skills that can't really be taught,
Mhm.
right? They are innate, they're handed down through the generations.
Mhm.
Skills take a lifetime to master.
Yes.
And I do think that there is sort of like a growing appreciation now, especially on the back of the art market, with people now collecting art. Design is seen as part of that. So there's the collectible design aspect to it.
Yeah.
But I just do feel like there's probably needs to be maybe a bit more promotion and education in educating consumers,
Mhm.
especially like, let's say, middle class consumers who be the ones to buy,
Yeah.
to buy the works, about the value of them. And also, I think there needs to be an industry that caters to that, because I think right now the industry's separated into more of the lower end, so the touristy, the cheap and cheerful that you can
Yep.
buy something, put in your house,
Yeah.
and then the sort of like more high end, as I say, the collectible, for the art collectors. But I haven't yet really seen many design brands that cater to the middle market, so
Mhm.
who would um, create products that are, high, more volume,
Yeah.
so like more towards the sort of like mass market, but very well made,
Okay.
made locally, and
Yeah.
have that design aesthetic, and fit into that price point in the middle market. So
Okay.
I think there's still a gap there.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think that the solution to that is consolidation within the market. I think there's so much fragmentation. A lot
Yeah.
of designers, a lot of makers work in silos.
Mm.
They're not even crossing borders, let alone, working with, people across, different regions. But I think there's value. There is value to that.
Yeah.
And what I do find is that when one thing latches on, it's like it becomes like tunnel vision.
Yeah.
One example is juju hats.
Yes. I was thinking that this morning.
Juju hats, like, oh my gosh, there are other really beautiful products coming out of Africa. I think when we're targeting the middle market, juju hats
Mm.
very, very popular. And also something from your region, which is the binga baskets as well.
Yes.
It seems to
Exactly. Yeah.
finger baskets. But we
Yeah.
did an ebook a few months back on baskets of Africa, and it was a learning experience even for me. There's so
Mm,
many beautiful types
yeah.
of basketry, and I just envision a world, a future where Africa is known like more widely as the source of a range of different
Mm,
baskets. But and I think those two examples illustrate it that it is possible to produce in volume, still make handmade, but still produce in volume. My only question in those cases is about the fair, small f, small t, the fair trade element. Like, are we sharing the value all the way down to the
mm,
makers or
mm.
the people at the bottom of the pyramid? That's my only concern. But I do think that it's possible, and there's a lot we can learn from that particular, those particular, I guess, product lines. Um,
Yeah.
so what do you think about the way African design is received now outside of Africa, whether it's within the diaspora community or diaspora in as much as let's say African American or even other cultures outside the Anglophone or European markets, further afield. Do you think that there is potential there for collaboration?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that when it comes to the US market in particular, Africa Design has found a place there. And I would attribute that to, the African American population, people within that community being interested in connecting to their heritage
Yeah,
and so will buy. Um, and there was also, I think, a lot of trade deals that made it kind of easier to export to the US. That's not the case anymore, as we all know. So I will be interesting to see the kind of like the impact that has. I know that on
yeah,
some businesses already have reported that they've lost 80% of production capacity, and sales and things like that. So um, yeah, so that was a big. The US was a big market.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
it's just a case of waiting to see, as I
Mm,
said, the effect of that. I
yeah,
do find that in the UK is a bit hit and miss, to be honest. And I think it depends on what's being sold. Um, as you said, baskets do very well.
mhm,
And items that sort of like are sold on the back of a trend. So the juju hats were a big trend, and so everybody and anybody was buying them and having them. Um, and I know that there are some parts of Asia, as far afield as let's say Japan may have a
mm,
few, but it's not volume.
mm,
Um, it may be like a handful of retail stores who may specialize in African design. And then it's a certain type of African design. It tends to be, I would say, probably slightly more rustic, well made,
yeah,
high end in terms of its prices, but it would have a more sort of like rustic or what they call bohemian appeal about it.
yeah,
Whereas across the continent, there are designers who will create, let's say, very refined pieces in metal, um,
mm,
and without necessarily just using natural materials. And so there are different aesthetics. So I don't think all the aesthetics per se are will prove popular or are taken up and sold. And I also find that buyers they feel like they're taking a risk on it, so they won't put
mm,
in big orders and may just decide maybe one or two pieces just to try it out in that sense. So I think there still needs to be we still need to cultivate a bit of confidence among buyers,
right, right,
to to buy more. And I think one of the questions that always comes up from people is that you put the word Africa in front of something, and then people suddenly go, I don't know what to do with it. Like, what
mm,
am I supposed to do with it? If you were to take that away, and just said this is a piece, you probably find that someone will be like, okay, that's nice. I'm going to put this in my house. So
Yeah.
there is that very strange sort of like perception, and I think it stems from stereotypes around Africa, the continent, what African design is, and Africa, the term itself. I do sometimes refer to it as being a loaded word,
Yeah. It's
depending on where it's used and how it's used. And
yeah.
yeah, so it
Yeah.
is. It's there needs to be, I think, again, a bit more education,
Yeah.
getting consumers educating, buyers, and that comes from designers and I suppose curators like myself and critics and people who are
Yeah.
writing about it,
Yeah.
talking more about it and helping to change the narrative through, I guess, the words that we use as well,
Mm.
and how we promote it.
I think that there's a lot we can learn from the rest of the creative space. I think there are artists right now in the music scene, especially who are unapologetically African, who
Yeah.
are it's a phenomenon I'd love to sort of see and how we can pick up lessons. But another
Mm.
factor about especially the UK and my experience of potential buyers in the UK is I've had reactions where you say, "Oh yes, this is what we're selling," and you show people a picture. Then they're afraid to even name it. It's obviously a basket hanging on a wall.
Yeah.
They're saying, "Oh my gosh, okay, I need to. I don't know if I'm. Is it basket?" And I think that there
Mm.
is, whilst it was a valid point about cultural appropriation, this issue of cultural appropriation, I think that some people are so afraid to engage with African products for fear of being accused of cultural appropriation. And I've often had to say to people, if you're buying a product from an African person and you're understanding the story and you're sharing that story as you sell it, that is not culture. I think the lady who made that particular product will appreciate you for doing that. It's not cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
Really, I agree with you. It really is a loaded word in so many ways.
Yeah.
And I guess you're so right about there needs to be more advocacy and more normalization of African design and
Yeah.
taking it out of the niche space and into because I mean if you look at Mexican design, people are very happy to put, Mexican design shares some elements within the bohemian aesthetic.
Mm. Hmm.
And people don't really hesitate to
No, they don't. No.
incorporate that into the design. So
Yeah.
there's still an uphill battle.
There
Uh,
is. And I would also add to that, I think also this whole idea of kind of like the relationship of, let's say, the West and Africa around poverty and aid, because that also became a way, the whole trade, not aid. And
mhm.
that also became a way to bring in products that were made by, rural communities, and that became the story as well. And I,
Mhm.
I found that, buyers were more comfortable to take something and think, oh, this is made by a poor person,
Mm.
and then sell it. Um,
Yeah,
but that's not the only aspect of it, right?
right.
And so it's like trying to create that understanding,
Yeah.
that there are designers, whether they're middle class, whether they're from wealthy backgrounds, or whether, they're from poor backgrounds who've made their way up, but they're different, they're designers at different levels who are creating.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not necessarily, tied to this whole trade, not aid, under the banner of that. They're people creating for the pleasure of creating. And
Yeah.
I say that, um, African designers have the right to that freedom to create how they want to create, right? And to promote their work how they want it to be seen. But unfortunately, you bring it into that global, um, world, and you find that people want to then put labels on it, or
Yeah.
people want to pigeonhole. because that's what they can deal with and that's what they can kind of handle. This is what we know, so we're going to put you over here. And it's having to push through, push through those barriers. Yeah, and kind of like demand that this is the way that I want to be seen. This is how I want my work to be seen. Because, I think one of the big questions and debates surrounding African design is actually using the term African design. Why can't a designer from Africa just be called a designer?
Where do you stand on that?
I I think we use African design in certain contexts. So, for example, if I'm having to talk about, design from different regions and have to group it collectively, it becomes necessary to use the term.
Mm-hmm.
But where I can, I try and reference a designer, let's say, by their country.
Okay.
So it would be saying a Kenyan designer, a Zimbabwean designer, a Nigerian designer. Because, as the debate you're obviously aware of is that, Africa's not a country, so let's not refer to it in that way. And I think that helps then cite the creative's work according to their country or their region.
Yeah.
I know that when I was doing making and selling my jewelry, I wanted to just be called a jewelry designer.
Okay.
Right? I did not want to be called a Zimbabwean designer or a, British Zimbabwean designer in most instances. I just felt like I'm a jewelry designer, just call me that. Because I felt like it had, and I think the debate is different from within the continent and outside the continent. Because I had this conversation when I was, in South Africa, curating Well Made Africa for the Handmade Contemporary Fair, and I raised the issue, and a lot of sort of, let's say, the local Africans were like, really? And I was like, yeah, because you'll find that those in the diaspora probably shy away from the label African because it stigmatizes and places them into boxes, whereas creators on the continent are more readily to embrace it.
It's the difference.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I think it comes around issues of identity and I think it's survival, right? Surviving in the society that you are living, working, and kind of, operating and selling your work in that sense. So it is a complicated issue. It's a very complicated one. And I think there's no real straightforward answer. And I just say it's up to the creator to decide how they want to be referred to.
Yeah. Because it's so hard to separate that from the designer or from the work, because a lot of work is inspired by your context.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the work at that end of the market is about storytelling. So how do you tell the story and overcome, preconceptions and stereotypes without also shooting yourself in the foot? And having yourself placed in those boxes, I'd say. Oh my gosh, it's a tough one. So, I mean, I guess it leads on to my question about emerging designers. What advice? It's a big question. I'm sure we could be here all day, but what advice would you give to emerging designers who come from different countries in Africa? Who are looking to expand? Because I think that if you're a designer in some markets, your local market is sufficient for you. But if you're an emerging designer coming from places that don't have a thriving local market and you need to expand into Europe and other parts of the world, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would say first, at the expense of sounding like a self-help book, be true to yourself. Be true to who you are. If you have a vision and an aesthetic, have that confidence to come in and be, be ready to defend it in some cases. When people think, oh no, this isn't right for us, because there can be that temptation to want to adapt to suit the needs of a Western market, and you don't want to go too far. When you are developing products, yes, you're you will, I think you will adapt to a certain extent to suit different markets, especially let's say in terms of colors and that, but you don't want to go too far that you no longer recognize who you are in the product. So I would say that, it's important that you keep your core. You need your values. You need to know what you are about to be able to go in there and showcase. And resilience, have resilience, because I think regardless of whether you are in the West or whether you're across the continent, if you are making and selling work, there are people who are going to like it and there are people who aren't. And you can't take that personally, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Do that.
Absolutely.
Because that would just mess with your head. So that's why I say you need to know who you are. I would also say study the markets.
Hmm.
See what people are doing in the markets that you want to enter into, right? Understand it, get to know the price points, where you can get to know the quality of the work, and then make sure that the work that you create
Mm.
matches and can stand and can hold its own alongside that level of the market where you want to enter into. And another thing I would say is make sure you have a strong story. Don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't be afraid also to showcase what goes into making your products. The techniques. If there's any history to it, highlight that. If you work with any artisan communities, I would say give them a voice as well.
Yeah.
Don't just say
Yeah.
I work with
Hey.
artisans, but name them.
Yeah.
Give them some of that platform, because then at least people can see that, okay, these are the people, these are their stories, behind the products that are being created.
Yeah.
And I would say, get your pricing right.
Okay.
I was speaking to a jewelry designer. She was like, because she was asking for advice, and she was like, "Oh, I sell my earrings for like $10, but I'm getting a stockist in the UK, and she wants to make them 20 pounds." And she's like, "But I'm not happy with that." And I'm like, "But actually, that kind of makes sense." And she was like,
Absolutely.
"You can't sell them for then £10, and besides, you won't make any money." Your
Yeah.
profit margins will be like,
Yeah.
nothing. And I said, you have to understand, that the Western market is not the same as your local market.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
you have to kind of understand exactly how it operates,
Mm.
before you come in and think that, okay, why isn't anybody buying my products, or why are the doors closing,
Mm.
in your
Mm-hmm.
face. And also your presentation and packaging. In terms of your branding, make sure it is polished and spot on, and that your products actually live up to what you are showing, because it's very easy to go onto Instagram and do beautiful visuals and things like that, but when people actually see the product and it doesn't match up, that's not good. And I've had that before, curating exhibition, where
Right.
saw online someone's products that looked really cool, but when they came, we had to do a bit of sanding and polishing to make sure that they were presentable, because they were badly packaged and all those
Yeah.
kind of things. So, yeah, make sure you kind of like live up to the promise of what you are saying that you do.
Yeah. That is so true. I've had similar experiences where opening a parcel when you've sourced should be like Christmas, should feel like Christmas, but
Yeah,
it can very easily turn into your worst nightmare when you open the box and you realize, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to
yeah.
bring my sewing machine out and do some remedial work here. That is so true, and I think we run a wholesale pricing masterclass because I think there's a disconnect between this is how much I'm retailing, and if you want to buy my products for a wholesale, I'll give you a 10% discount.
Hmm.
We found ourselves in a situation with my last business as a retailer, selling, sourcing products which were quoted at the actual 100% retail price. And so people were coming and trying on these clothes in London and then sending their family to buy the particular size from the same brand. Luckily.
Yeah.
I was like, why are there so many people coming trying and then saying they come tomorrow and they never do? But yeah, it's an education process. I think also maybe designers would want to know, um, how do they balance uh, how do they balance preserving tradition with incorporating contemporary design into their work. And I know the work needs to be authentic, they need to be true to it. But it is possible for a designer to say, this is the identity that my products are going to take. How do you, I don't know whether there's an actual one size fits all answer to that question. But what do you see succeed in your work?
Yeah, in fact, actually, that's a question that comes up time and again here where I am in the UK as well. You know, I've been to events where people have been speaking on panels and have been talking about should we really be preserving tradition or should we not? And I think that when it comes to preserving tradition, it's about I think preserving the essence of the craft and the skills. Um, but every generation that comes along adds their own layer. You know, they leave their own mark um, on those skills, on that tradition. So that's how tradition evolves. And I think tradition needs to evolve, right? Because
Yes.
if we just preserve it and hold on to it, we stifle it.
Mhm.
And then you have the situation where it just gets stuck in this time warp, right? Um, and nothing really happens. And I think that's probably why people then find that they don't value it as much as they could because they're just seeing the same thing over and over again, and then that's why stereotypes happen. Um, so with emerging designers, yeah, be free to experiment,
Yeah, it's
free to
that
try
key.
new things. Just keep
Thank
the core of the skill, right?
Yes.
That's the core of it, and that's the tradition that you can um, refer back to.
Mm,
But
mm,
you should have that freedom to be able to see where can I take it next. You've
yeah.
inherited it,
Mm,
right? And
yes.
so move it forward, and then hand it on to the next generation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and that's how the skill survives because then it's given relevance
Mm,
in the present,
yes.
right? And then it creates, it helps create objects that can be used. Let's say whether they are fashionable, hopefully timeless,
Mm,
but still have that kind of fashionable quality that people are you know interested in displaying or using,
mm,
interacting with in their homes as well. But yeah, I just feel like, yeah, let's just freshen it up because people, we're human, we like newness as well, right? Alongside the old. So
yeah.
I think it creates things that are fascinating
Mm,
for us and for us to be able to see. Oh, I don't think I've seen this being used in this way before or presented like this, and then that sparks curiosity, and it also inspires someone else, right, who may
yeah.
see this person has done this, you know this has triggered this idea, and
Yeah.
then and things move forward in that way.
And they say, I think there is a fear amongst designers that if people will copy my work, that's always a fear. But I think you can't be replicated. They say that a good artist, is it true? A good artist copies and a bad one steals. But I just feel, and then in business they say, well, if someone takes your idea, they haven't stolen your execution of the idea. But there's nothing wrong with that whole interchange, I think. I really do, like, my big word is collaboration all the time. It's about
Yeah,
community and bouncing ideas off each other and being inspired by each other. And the whole tide rises,
yeah.
everybody rises together with it. So yeah. So Tapiwa, you got some interesting projects that you're working on, lots of curation. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so I think post lockdown, I found myself suddenly first in Italy, working for an event called Homa Faber,
Yeah.
and they kind of invited me to help curate one of their spaces. And I'd never heard of the event, and I think it had just started in 2019. It had its first edition, and so, because of the lockdowns that were happening, it was postponed, and then I was invited along for the 2022 edition. And this was, I would say, it was like a real steep learning curve because I suddenly went from, just me doing my thing, and was catapulted to the very high end of the craft and design market. And I was like, okay, what am I doing here? But it was, but it has been, but it's been an incredible learning experience
Mm.
because it literally brought me face to face and into the center of, brands that you probably just only see in magazines.
Wow.
And, like in like Architectural Digest and places like that.
Yeah.
So talking to, um, the owners of the company and
Mhm.
the artisans who actually create. And it was a real understanding into how, especially sort of Italian luxury works,
Mm.
and understanding how they use craftsmanship as a DNA of their country. It's like protected. It's this whole. It's just incredible the way that they do it, and very fascinating to see how they do it,
Okay.
and how the artisans work. It's like usually like these small sort of like artisan workshops, working for the company, and producing their work. So I did that, and that was also a platform as well and an opportunity to bring in African designers into that.
Okay.
Because I remember the room that I was doing, I curated. It was like almost about 100 pieces.
All right.
And among them, it was a chance to bring in designers from Africa onto this platform as
That's
well. So
amazing. I love that you do that. That.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. So for me, it's just that I thought, okay, I'm here, I'm doing this, and this is, Africa is my focus. I can't be at this level and then just focus on,
Mm.
just the European brands. It's
Mhm.
there are African brands that can compete at this level.
Yeah.
Let's bring them in and include them in the showcase as well.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so as I said, that was learning, and something that informs my practice today. And more recently, I found myself working now in India, and so on a more sort of global south to global south level,
Mm.
and getting an insight into India and its craftsmanship and its craft heritage and how it uses it. Because what's very interesting is whereas a place like Italy, it was more, let's say, the high end, super luxury level. With
Okay.
India now, I'm now seeing how craftsmanship works at scale.
Right.
Still high quality, um, you know, still high quality, still beautiful artworks, but how they can do it, um, you know, as volume. Because what I found is that a lot of UK brands will actually produce in India. And
Yeah.
India's kind of like seen as this hub for craftsmanship,
Yes.
for getting it done. Similar in the same way, like, China's kind of like seen as you go there as a factory sort of work.
Mm.
India's sort of like seen as a place where you can come and produce things, handmade things,
Yeah.
as I said, in volume. So for me, it's been a very immersive experience, coming up close, seeing it, understanding why it works for India as a country, I think,
Yes.
because they have a very large population.
And it's homogeneous.
Yeah. And so, there are a lot of people who are available for work.
Okay. But isn't that the case with Africa?
Across the continent, but then not all countries may have the large populations. If
Right.
we're looking at a country by country basis,
Okay.
the continent in its entirety, yes. Um, but then I think it's also, being in India again is also sort of like seeing that people go there because it's cheap to produce. And that also raises the issue, I think, of ethics as well, fair trade ethics. And it's all these like complicated things, and just seeing how um, different companies, organizations kind of like navigate that. And I think it is a place where, um, I mean, anything and anything can be done. I mean, literally anything. It is just, it's very overwhelming in that sense. You want something done, someone can do it. Um, but yeah, I think, and it's just, and when I go there, I do have my Africa hat on in the sense
Yeah.
of always like comparing,
Mhm.
contrasting, and then seeing, okay, what does Africa do better?
Mm.
What's India doing that could sort of like be translated to Africa, and
Right.
just like seeing how, what are the lessons that can be learned to help sort of like improve
Okay.
the craft and design industry across Africa.
Yes, I totally. I mean, I've had two interesting conversations related to that. I'm speaking to somebody today who's
Mhm.
got years, I think 40 years of experience as and mainly in textiles, but she's worked, with some of the big names, and she said that she started out her career in India as a 20-something-year-old, spent 2 years
Yeah.
working for big UK companies sourcing in India, and she can smell a cheap product from a mile away. And she's talking about how when she travels today in around Europe, there are shops that will be selling products under the banner of ethical, but when
Mm.
she looks at the price tag, she knows there is no way
Yeah.
these products were produced ethically, especially particularly when it comes to the wages part.
Yes.
No way
Yes.
these products have been produced ethically. And so
Yeah.
it's sad that, the public are buying that, and
Mm.
they're obviously reinforcing those elements. So yeah, so I'm curious to see how we can avoid falling into those traps. In fact,
Mm.
how we can get out of those, because right now on this continent, those kinds of behaviors are actually happening.
Yeah.
What other interesting comparisons did you pick up?
I think, well, in terms of comparisons, I'd probably say it's like seeing it through the lens of designers. I've had an opportunity to connect designers to artisans to come in and do, to do collaborative partnerships and create products. So it's like this learning exchange where um, we kind of say, it's not about the designer coming in and dictating to the artisan community, but the designer coming in with an open mind to learn. They're
Mm,
sharing their experiences, but learn from the artisans, because these artisans have um, centuries of tradition, and they've got that knowledge to share as well.
mm,
And I think what's been fascinating there is just seeing how um, some of these artisans, their their skills, and I think the family workshops go back, let's say, 7 centuries. They've been able to kind of preserve it in that way.
mm,
And it's sort of like seeing the parallels, especially, because obviously India's been through colonialism as well. Africa, of course, has had that. And just seeing um, how they're kind of like moving past that into, that post-colonial, the post-colonial era, and how they are now um, cultivating homegrown brands in that sense, and how they are embracing their identity, um, you know, creating products that are now, yes, garnering the attention of the West. And I would say that that's probably another thing, is that we shouldn't really be hung up about what the West thinks, right? In that sense, the West shouldn't be a benchmark of saying that, you make it in the West, you've made it. Right. So they are, but they're fiercely proud of what they do, right? And creating businesses and brands around that, and selling them internationally, but selling it on their terms. I think is kind of been inspiring, and something, to learn from, and seeing just how exactly they are doing it
mm,
the way that they are doing it. And of course, I mean, I would say there are challenges, there are
mm,
the issues of ethics as well,
mhm,
that have to be navigated. And
mm.
and overcome. So it's like seeing the best bits and then seeing the things that maybe aren't so great that, we
Yeah.
see how do you do that better.
Yeah.
And I think, the organization, the foundation who have brought me to work on their project in India are kind of very focused on making life better, making a positive contribution through craft and design, and really making their artisan heritage a part of the country's economic success, and
Mm,
helping the artisans also to benefit from that as well
right.
in
I-
that way. So
I'm blown away by you saying that they have workshops going back 7 generations.
yeah. Oh yeah, they do. I was quite shocked myself as well. I was thinking
Oh,
how, yeah, but they've managed to keep it going. But unfortunately, we're at the stage now where the younger generation are not taking it up because it's very hard, I think, to earn a decent living from it. So there are stories now where you will see maybe there's an elderly gentleman or an elderly woman who's working as like the sole person now as part of that family workshop and can't find someone to take it forward.
okay.
So and I think, the same thing can be seen across Africa where crafts start to disappear.
Mhm.
And it's just trying to get um, younger people interested in it. And what's interesting, I think, in India, which again parallels Africa, is that it's like young designers who are coming in, starting studios, starting workshops, and engaging artisans and bringing people together and doing that training and just trying to keep um, those skills alive, whilst helping to modernize them, helping them to evolve, as we were talking, about that earlier,
Yeah.
and just giving them a place today, and just encouraging that sort of um, their longevity and,
Yeah.
and and the ability for them to be handed down.
Yeah, I think the challenge in Africa is we've got a youth bulge, I think they call it, which is, in a few years is going to be a crisis if it isn't already. High unemployment rates, but and also flight from rural areas to urban, which means that most craft activity happens in rural areas. But
Yeah,
how do you get a young person to engage in craft making when they're earning peanuts because
true.
of, unscrupulous um, brokers and players in the market. That is the challenge of this is why we need to move craftsmanship on this continent up a notch from the touristic cheap and cheerful to design led maybe, or deeply cultural but really
Mm,
with more
mhm,
thought going into it,
mm.
into the production. And then obviously if you're not a designer, if you're not a
Yeah,
creative, partnering with people who are creatives to
yeah,
to get in there. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that rising class or cohort of designers coming up the way you've described in India. I'm looking
yeah,
for that because those tend to come from, let's say, the cities, and they tend to come from the middle classes,
yeah,
I would say. So now it's just about stimulating those collaborations.
yeah.
Same
And
like,
as you said, sharing, like not being afraid to share ideas.
yeah,
Um, and I would love to see, I think, more Pan-African collaboration
thank
as
you.
well happening,
Yeah.
because I think some exciting things could come out of that. And, we have seen examples of that. I
Mm.
think one of the recent ones was Arcs and her bags in Ghana,
Yeah.
um, who collaborated with Pichulik,
Oh,
the
yeah. Yes, yes.
designer, on
It's
handles on the woven, and it just it
cool.
was quite cool, and it's just something different, and you think, oh wow, this is happening. And so, this is like a south and west um
Cool.
collaboration. But yeah, it'd be nice to just see um that connectivity, and just that opening up to new ideas, and sharing those techniques, and seeing what else can come out of it.
Great. Here's to that happening.
Yeah.
What, just as a final question, do you have anything else exciting you can tell us about happening on the African design space that we should all be looking at?
Well, I don't know about exciting, but I feel like I would say, speaking from my attention right now, I kind of think one of the spaces that I think Africa can really step in and own is the luxury industry.
Okay.
Africa kind of like leading in sustainable and um, yes, sustainable luxury and inclusive luxury as well.
Okay.
Because I think luxury around the world is coming under a lot of scrutiny, and there's always like something happening somewhere, some crisis happening somewhere, and it's known for um, its unsustainable practices. And I think that Africa, especially with its level of craftsmanship, makes it perfectly suited uh, to lead the way in a new type of luxury.
Okay.
Luxury, I think that benefits everyone. That benefits people, that benefits the environment. Yeah, and so I'm kind of quite excited to see how far that will go and what will come out of that.
Amazing. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your interesting insights. We'll be watching, and I encourage everybody to check out Atelier 55 blog for a start, and definitely see if you can get yourself a Contemporary Design Africa. Follow Tapiwa on social media, because she really is somebody who shows us the most exciting and interesting pieces, and so it's fascinating to watch you, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that so much. Thank you.